It is a privilege this morning to be here with you in the inauguration of the seminar on Cuba's changing international profile and its relationship to the Caribbean. This meeting is part of the cycle of conferences and activities of the project Creating Community in the Americas of the Latin American program of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. Supported by the Ford Foundation, Creating Community is the result of more than 12 years of arduous work by a group of U.S., Latin American, and Caribbean scholars and experts looking at questions of international affairs and security in the Americas. By bringing together a diverse group of individuals from a range of professional activities, the project has sought to build a real security community in the Americas that can adequately respond to the challenges in the hemisphere's international agenda after the end of the Cold War, but especially after September 11, 2001. Of the West Indies, particularly Principal Gordon Shirley, for their outstanding effort in putting together today's conference and program. I also want to thank colleagues from the Caribbean, Colombia, Canada, and the United States who are joining us today for this meeting for their valuable contribution to our understanding of the issues surrounding Cuba's changing role in the region. I hope that the results from today's deliberations would help bridge some of the gaps that divide our region and in the process further develop the sense of community that serves as a goal and inspiration for those of us who work on this project. Thank you very much for your presence and hope you enjoy today's discussions. I'd like to invite Professor Diana Thorburn, chair of the first panel, and the members of the first panel, discussion on Cuba's foreign policy. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Dr. Perales, Dr. Rapley, thank you so much for the kind invitation that CaPRI and the Wilson Center have extended to me to be here today. CG, the Center for International Governance Innovation, with which I'm associated in Waterloo, Canada, is Canada's leading international affairs think tank. We're also very proud of our association with CaPRI. In April, we put together a seminar in Tobago, and Kim Marie Spence said to me, well, you must come to Jamaica. So here I am. I'm delighted to be here. It's been a number of years since I hadn't visited Kingston, and I'm very glad to be here. But let me get to the point. We are here to discuss developments in Cuba and its environs, its neighbors, by which I take it to be not just the Caribbean environment, but also the broader Latin American setting. We had yesterday a fascinating presentation by Minister Bartlett on the way Jamaica sees the development of tourism and its relationship with Cuba. We will no doubt hear from the Prime Minister and from other speakers today about that same subject and the Caribbean perspective on the changes that are happening in Cuba. So let me speak from a Latin American perspective. This is a somewhat dangerous exercise. Cuba has a way of confounding all prognostications. And let me share a little story with you. In 1990, when Chile made its own transition to democracy, one of the first things that was on the agenda for President Elwin was what to do about Chile's international reinsertion, its welcome back into the international community from which it had been ostracized, and quite rightly so, under the Pinochet dictatorship. One of the things that had to be done was to reestablish diplomatic relations with a number of countries that had broken it with Chile because of the 1973 coup and because of General Pinochet's shenanigans. And Cuba, of course, was one of the countries on that list. And I remember the argument was made at the time by a lot of people, including editorials in the press, that it would be a great mistake to reestablish diplomatic relations with Cuba, because if Chile were to do so, it would be probably the last country on earth to do so with revolutionary Cuba, since the government was about to fall. This was only a few months after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and you certainly didn't want to make that kind of mistake. Well, I argued very strongly in the press and on television against that view. 18 years had passed. You can imagine how we would look if we had decided to wait for the Cuban revolutionary government to fall before we establish diplomatic relations with them. So what I'm saying is that one has to be very careful in these prognostications about what will happen. And I would like to venture that today we are in a somewhat similar situation, and I will get back to this. A lot of people have been making prognostications about what will happen in a post-Fidel Cuba. And again, Cuba has a way of confounding us, so we have to be very careful about what we say in this regard. Futurology is a dangerous exercise generally, but I would say it is particularly so in the case of Cuba. What I would like to submit to you this morning is a number of propositions about how I see the Cuban situation from a Latin American perspective, from in some ways the Southern Cone in South America, but I would also include here Central America and Mexico. As I say, the Caribbean perspective, the Jamaican perspective has its own specificities, and we have a number of speakers that will address that. First of all, the future place and role of a changing Cuba in the Americas will be a key issue on the inter-American agenda for years to come, perhaps leaving behind many others. And in that sense, CaPRI, the Wilson Center, and certainly the Jamaican government need to be commended for this initiative and for this gathering, which I think is really addressing a key issue. The second point that I would like to make, the second proposition that I would like to put to you, is that the approach of the vast majority of Latin American governments today to change in Cuba, the challenge of change, the subtitle of this seminar has it, is a pragmatic and practical one. Although a majority of Latin American countries, in South America we're talking 8 out of 10, are ruled today by left or left-leaning governments, many of whose leaders have great affection for the Cuban Revolution. Many of them visit Havana regularly. President Lula of Brazil has visited Havana a number of times in recent years.